Hi guys, I'm Natalie, and throughout this year I've been thinking about what belonging truly means. Most sources, like the Cambridge Dictionary, will say that belonging is a sensation of happiness and comfort from being accepted by a group. But the verb to belong is slightly different. To belong is to have proper qualifications for a group. There aren't any feelings attached to it. As we finish high school, I think everyone has felt like they didn't belong at some point. You might be in sports teams and clubs and even in your own friend groups, but feel disconnected with them. But the question is, how do you cope with these feelings of discomfort and rejection? Is it possible to feel like one belongs even when they don't fit strictly into the classifications of a group? To answer that, we can look at belonging in society, and no one better defines social norms than
Regina George.
In the movie Mean Girls, Regina is in a high school clique, and in this scene a couple friends try to sabotage her and cut holes in her shirt. But even when she completely defies fashion trends, she somehow still belongs within the student body. She feels not only comfortable but even confident, which is evident by her walk. In fact, the other students even like her for being different and they copy her. So it's clear that Regina's acceptance of herself is what allows her to feel the satisfaction of belonging even when she deviates from the rest. Now, some might say that humans have a natural tendency to compartmentalize ourselves with people similar to us, and while that might be important for intimacy and connection, Amin Malouf, the author of In the Name of Identity, describes why that can be dangerous. He refers to a French man with Algerian parents who has two different allegiances or belongings, and he ought to be allowed to use both. More than that, a youth's personality is made up of many more ingredients. The metaphor of ingredients that compose a personality, such as how they are synthesized to create a meal, portrays identity as something of multifaceted components that are developed with time and effort, rather than something that's given at birth and unchangeable. Malouf will later enumerate examples of people with different allegiances to places in conflict. He says that it's these people that help mediate polarizing viewpoints, but when they treat identity as individual compartments, people are instead forced to choose sides. So people might have similarities with groups and therefore belong to them, but ultimately each person is unique in their experiences. Acknowledging these factors can procure the feeling of belonging even more than trying to fit parts of oneself into an external label of a group. As for a more familiar setting, we can explore Jhumpa Lahiri's novel The Namesake, which follows Gogol Ganguly, an American Bengali boy who is named after the Ukrainian author Nikolai Gogol. He hates how his name is neither American nor Indian, and he tells his parents that no one takes me seriously. In reality, the only person who didn't take him seriously, the only person who tormented him and was embarrassed of his name, was Gogol himself. Because of this, he eventually legalizes it to Nikhil. Lahiri's choice to use third-person omniscient rather than first-person shows the reader that Gogol's actions aren't true to himself. When strictly using first-person, it seems like Gogol hates his name, when what he really hates is not fitting in or not belonging to society's classifications of how he should look, act, and be called. But in the end, he makes some realizations. Here, we can see the personification of the name Gogol, which emphasizes the importance of someone's name to their worldly existence. The death of a name is also the death of a person and all their experiences with it. When Gogol realizes this, he stops feeling like he needs to be called Nikhil in order to belong as a so-called normal American Indian. There's no solace, another word for comfort, in trying. From Gogol, we can learn that in trying to conform, we sometimes lose our uniqueness. In a time where we forge new relationships, try to join new clubs, and choose different majors, it's important to take a second and accept yourself first. And this doesn't just apply to our youth. It lasts a lifetime, and we can see that in the remains of the day. In this novel, we follow Mr. Stevens, a butler for the British aristocracy who contemplates the idea of greatness. For the most part, we see Stevens accept that he isn't a part of the aristocracy, yet he continues to idolize it in trying to achieve greatness. In other words, if Stevens' employers are great, him serving them also makes him great by extension. His identity is synonymous with his job. Initially, he defends his employer Lord Darlington for having affiliations to Nazi Germany and tries to maintain indifference to his employer's actions, but in the end of the novel, Stevens no longer describes Darlington as great, and he ends up realizing his inadequacies. More importantly, he realizes what he's lost all these years. He says, "You see, I trusted in his lordship's wisdom. I can't even say I made my own mistakes." Really, one has to ask oneself, what dignity is there in that? So clearly, Stevens still puts his employer on somewhat of a pedestal by calling him courageous. But the key thing is that his employer held his own set of beliefs when Stevens didn't. Now, we can see Stevens' desperation in justifying his past actions through the repetition of the word trust. He trusted dutifully and unquestionably so much so that he turned a blind eye to what most people would define as moral wrongdoing. So Stevens belongs very well to the butler profession. He's subordinate and he's dedicated to serving. But in doing so, he sacrifices his agency and his emotions, and in the end, he never feels true fulfillment in his life. Of course, it was probably difficult for Stevens to ignore his emotions. It's difficult to look internally and ask yourself what is right or wrong or what you truly desire. But in Consolations, David Whyte will say that to be alone for a length of time is to shed an outer skin. Alone, we live in our bodies as a question rather than a statement. Instead of being physically isolated, Whyte sees being alone as a state of reflection without external opinions. The shedding of skin is often symbolic of rejuvenation and reveals something more vulnerable underneath the mask. And when we stop living by statements which are absolute and defined, we stop living by trying to belong into categories constructed by society. Living in question allows for a more open and curious perspective towards who we really are, without being dictated by external factors. So to my initial question, I would say yes, it is possible. I don't think belonging is something concrete that we can possess indefinitely, but it's a sense of satisfaction we can develop. In realizing our own uniqueness, we can feel like we belong because we're secure with ourselves. We can feel belonging without forcing ourselves to conform.